So welcome to everybody somewhere between Moscow and Madrid, between Northern and Southern Europe, and perhaps beyond. Before I will present the schedule of our event, I would like to thank you and to thank all of those who have been involved in this European project, our coordinators in 12 European countries, all our colleagues at the RLS in Berlin and in our 10 offices, and also very warm thank you to our patrons. Today we are launching this Anti-Fascist Europe website and network, and after warm welcome by Johanna Bussemer, head of the European unit at Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, and by Bjørn Ihler, the co-founder of the Khalifa Ihler Institute, we will introduce the idea behind this network and will proudly present this website named Anti-Fascist Europe. The second part of the event will consist of a panel discussion on the topic of countering the far right, anti-fascists and civil society in solidarity against the European shift to the right, which will bring together well-respected experts with different perspectives from all over the continent. On the panel, we will have Liz Fekete, director of the Institute of Race Relations in London, Ioanna Meitani from the trial monitoring project GoldenDawnWatch in Athens, and Eliza Rutynowska, lawyer and human rights activist from Warsaw. The panel will be moderated by our colleague Josip Jagic from the RLS Belgrade office. At the end of the event, Amelia Martinez-Lobo from the RLS Madrid office will speak before giving the floor to Christy Moore, the famous anti-fascist singer from Ireland, to perform Yellow Triangle, which she recorded especially for us. I'm very pleased that today we are having a graphic recording as well. We will take a look from time to time to Jorgo's work. But now, Johanna, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and comrades, I'm very pleased to welcome you here in the name of Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung to the presentation of the project European Network of Anti-Fascist Monitoring, in short ENAM. We all need protection from Nazis. We were consciously quoting Stanislav Markelov here in the beginning. One of our approaches when we invented the ENAM project was to remember all the victims of fascist terror and Nazi violence. Stanislav Markelov was a brave human rights lawyer who got murdered side by side with his fearless companion, the journalist Anastasia Baburova, today on the 19th of January in 2009, 13 years ago, in the Moscow city center by a group of Nazi killers. But there's so much more to remember when it comes to January. We can remember the 19-year-old high school senior who was badly injured when the so-called Nationalsozialistischer Untergrund, a brutal Nazi network acting in Germany, placed a bomb in her father's grocery store in 2000. The shop was targeted to hit the Iranian migrant community in Germany. The NSU, the Nationalsozialistischer Untergrund, as they called themselves, killed in the 13 years between 1998 and 2011, 9 people of Greek, Turkish, and Kurdish background and a police officer, and injured dozens with their nail bombings, brutal raids, and bank robberies. We remember Uri Jallo, who was killed at a police station in Dessau on the 17th of January in 2005. Somebody poured him with fire accelerant and he was burned alive. We have to remember the racist, nationalistic mob which, empowered by the deselected former President Trump, attacked the US Capitol on the 6th of January 1 year ago. But there are also dates in the longer past which let us remember and stand still for a moment. Rosa Luxemburg and her comrade Karl Liebknecht were killed on a cold winter evening, the 15th of January in 1919 by far-right paramilitaries in Berlin. On the 30th of January in 1933, Adolf Hitler was taking over power in Germany. But this was also the day when more than 1 million people of all kinds of political backgrounds tried to prevent what was coming when they marched through the streets of Berlin. Nationalism became the horrifying reality in Europe for the following 12 years anyway. This should never happen again. But we can also remember the liberation of the concentration camp Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Soviet Red Army on the 27th of January, which stands for the beginning of the end of the Holocaust, the darkest chapter of all human history. Nevertheless, fascist thinking, nationalistic madness, and a racist worldview is not defeated today. The opposite is the case. Those tendencies are in a process of a spooky re-rising, not only in Western countries, but worldwide. We are becoming witnesses how democracies, which we considered to be stable, transforming themselves into illiberal autocracies like Hungary or Brazil. We experience how right misanthropic thinking conquers our daily life and enters deeper, while a human anti-fascist democratic resistance seems to be paralyzed and despondent. There isn't a lot of protest or indignation if it comes to the brutalization of the borders of the European Union, as the Polish-Belarusian border right now, or the Mediterranean, where our governments fight a war against unarmed human beings. 10,000 ground, freeze, or starve when they try to enter Europe. More than 45,000 lost their lives since 1993 as the Amsterdam-based NGO United for Intercultural Action counted. The pandemic did not shift the situation into a broad thinking of solidarity at all. To quote Bob Dylan, it's not dark yet, but it's getting there. So we tried to let a bright light in again, and this is another aim of the ENAM project. We hope that it will reach as many people as possible who are willing to work and act as anti-fascists. We provide as much information as we are able to collect about the crucial extent of right-wing activities to alarm and to power to counteract. This project is meant for everybody who's willing to join that path, no matter which background he or she has. It's about humanism. Thanks to all my encouraged and wonderful colleagues in the European unit at RLS and all those who joined us on this long and winding journey to get this project as far as it is. It's launched today, but it's not done yet. We are just starting. In this sense, I'm handing over to our partner, Bjørn Ihler, who is the director of the Khalifa Ihler Institute. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Johanna. It is such a pleasure to be able to share all the work that has gone into this project with you all. For me, in many ways, the project started many years ago with the overall work against the global far right, trying to put both terrorist activities and the activities of political parties and groups on the far right into a more global international perspective, where we see the risks posed by fascists, not in silos, not as individual incidents or individual acts of violence or individual political agendas, but as a larger interconnected issue. And so the Khalifa Ihler Institute started what is called the Hate Map about 3 years ago at this point. About a year and a half ago, we reached out to the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation and our friends there to see whether there were grounds for collaboration. At that point, the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation already had established a working group on anti-fascism, and together we have made our path into this effort to create Antifascist Europe, the online platform through which we are making it possible to explore the interconnected network of the fascist movements across all of Europe. The collaboration has been very exciting. We've been working very closely together for the last year and a half or so, both to establish a methodology behind the project, to establish a network behind the project and all of the researchers that are supporting it by contributing to the data, as well as by building out the digital platform for sharing the data and making it accessible to the public. Of course, working on violent extremism, terrorism, violence from the far right is a challenging topic at times. We have been putting some work also into working on definitions and methodology, and we will be getting back to that. But for now, I want to say that the working thesis of the Institute is that violent extremism is a violent denial of diversity. This is particularly prominent in white supremacist extremism, where it's self-evident that it is about the elimination of the diversity that our continent has, of people who are falling outside of the narrow groups of that white supremacists are in favor of. And it's extremely important that we continue to keep up the fight for a pluralistic, diverse and a peaceful Europe. And I hope that our network and our tools will be something that empowers many to continue contributing in our efforts to maintain a healthy community across Europe. With that, I'll hand over to Fritz.
Thank you so much, Bjørn, for your introductory words, and thanks to everybody who is here. I welcome you to our launch, and I just want to give you an idea of Anti-Fascist Europe and the network behind it, the European Network of Anti-Fascist Monitoring. Anti-Fascist Europe is a research project that is focusing on the inter and transnational networks, cooperations, and interactions of far-right players all over Europe. The scope ranges from right-wing terrorist groups to fascist or neo-Nazi camaraderies, new right fellowships, conservative think tanks and parties in and out of parliaments, both on national and European levels. The core interest of Anti-Fascist Europe are the international connections in between all these scenes in order to build up on and contribute to the existing monitoring done by anti-fascist groups at national or regional levels. What Anti-Fascist Europe and its 12 coordinators throughout Europe can add to this is collecting these results, who often stem from a national or regional perspective, augment them with our own findings, and put together the bigger picture, a kind of panorama of the international corporations and networks of the far right that are mushrooming these days, not only in Europe. We will always refer to the mentioned work of others, and we are looking forward to more intense cooperation with them, or you, dear friends, if you're listening in today. Because far-right networks are currently capable of establishing transnational structures of support, from intellectual exchange to financial and logistical aid, mutual promotion, advertising, and participation in joint events such as demonstrations, concerts, sports tournaments, festivals, as far as supplying safe houses and hideouts, as well as money collecting and even weapon transfer. Just let me give some random spotlights of these settings. Just in December, the Austrian police busted a weapons stash with dozens of automatic weapons and 100,000 shots of ammunition. Only one of more than 20 of such stashes, which were found alone in 2019 in Austria. The podcast Inside Austria is wondering if this is the arms build up for a Nazi militia, which consists of members in Germany and Austria. More and more police officers and members of the armed forces of different European countries are involved in Day X trainings and arming with war armament, be it inside of national armies, such as Centuria inside the Ukrainian army, or police forces such as Nordkreuz and UNITA in Germany, or likewise in far-right prepper groups. Nazis and nationalists are to be found clandestinely in war zones such as Eastern Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, or elsewhere to train themselves for the racial holy war, the decisive battle between the white race and the intruding others. Or take a look at the crazy story of Manuel Ochsenreiter, who passed away last year in August. He was working for the far-right member of the German Federal Parliament, Markus Frohnmayer, of the semi-fascist party Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, in the years 2018 and 19, when he was indicted of having instigated members of the Polish Nazi group Falanga to commit an arson attack on an Hungarian cultural institute in Ukraine to cause diplomatic trouble between these two countries. By the way, members of Falanga are also inside the semi-official and state-sponsored Polish militias that do chase refugees at the eastern borders and from time to time are seen again in war zones wheresoever. But there is also a cultural and intellectual networking across the continent. For example, the Asgard's Rye Festival, first in Moscow, then in Kiev, attracts Nazis from all over Europe. Antifascists spotted members of the Casa Pound movement in Italy, the US group Atomwaffen Division, and also the German Nazi party Der Dritte Weg, which, by the way, is now heavily involved in the increasingly aggressive German anti-vax movement. And influential fascist intellectuals are touring the continent, such as the Russian senior philosopher of some Eurasia idea, Alexander Dugin, whom, by the way, Ochsenreiter called a father figure, or the dark star of the early Trump months, Steve Bannon, who has been networking in many different countries in Europe, meeting not only Nigel Farage in the UK, but also Alice Weidel of the German AfD, the Swiss far-right politician and publisher Roger Köppel, and Italy's then Minister of Interior, Matteo Salvini. The internet plays an important role in connecting internationally. New kinds of half-closed, half-public communication provide space for radicalization and identity building with image boards, messenger services, and chat fora, which offer new forms of community and push and trigger perpetrators to take action. Monitoring has to keep a wakeful eye on this fatal development. Assassins like the ones in Christchurch, Halle, and Hanau, and all of the misogynist incel attackers were part and active on international internet communities and relying on their support. Many of them were in contact to each other, such as the Norwegian mass murderer Breivik, who tried to get in touch with the German NSU terrorist Beate Zschäpe, the Christchurch mass murderer with the Austrian chief of the identitarian movement. The assassin of Halle was referring to Christchurch, the German Group S, now on trial in Stuttgart, to the anti-Semitic Halle attack, and the murderer at the Munich Olympia Mall in 2016, who shot 9 people, again referred to Breivik, and so on. In some countries, right-wing authoritarian and extremely nationalist parties entered, formed, or are part of governments, like, for example, in Hungary, Poland, Turkey, and so on, and are opening gateways for far-right actors into official spheres and funding opportunities. Some examples, for example, the Ochsenreiter story, show that out of such symbiosis occur threats of violent attacks, terrorism, and intimidation. As we see this danger very clearly and increasingly threatening, we are interested to expose the crossover potential of hierarchical and inhumane ideologies and nationalist or even Euro-nationalist, pan-European or Eurasian notions to establish some European network of white supremacists whose main features are nationalism and the revisionist adjustment of a heroic national saga, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-feminism and misogyny, homophobia, and other hateful mindsets. During the current capitalist crisis, the severe ecological crisis and the crisis of representation in the Western kind of democratic societies, white supremacists can gain momentum over simplifying and drawing populist conclusions and loopholes that deny the global social problems and realities. These conclusions contain the idea, driven by conspiracy ideologies, that there must be an existential defense of the white states against the non-white populations from abroad, which try to conquer the Western areas of wealth and welfare. The vocabulary, however, stems from manifestos of right-wing terrorists who talk about the great replacement, like the Christchurch murderer in his manifesto, or about Bevölkerungsaustausch, Umvolkung, Volkstod, which means something like population exchange or population extinction, as the German NPD, the fascist party NPD, the Pegida movement, and also AfD are using it, or about le grand remplacement, like the fascist French philosopher Jean-René Camus puts it. This is what Anti-Fascist Europe will try to oversee, to collect data on this alarming development and publicize on our very website we are launching today. Building on the anti-fascist tradition of solidarity and unassailable humane outlook, our monitoring project aims not only to promote a European network of anti-fascist actors, but also to inform an interested democratic public about hazardous developments, not only on the far right fringe, but increasingly also in the political center of our society, and to encourage them to engage in acts of resistance. Thank you for your attention. I think I hand back to Franziska. Yes.
Now we hand over to our colleague to show us the new website.
Thank you.
So a very warm welcome. My name is Philip, and I can say that we are very honored that so many people take part in the launch event. And I would like to give you a short introduction to the website and its functions. So as already said, the main goal of Antifascist Europe is to collect information about the far right across Europe and to provide a platform where anti-fascist research about the far right and the interconnection is collected and shared publicity. So let's have a look to the landing page. It gives you a brief overview and includes a simple version of the data explorer and informs you about the latest articles and monthly reports that have been updated to the website, as you can see below. So let's directly jump to one of the core functions of the website, and that's the data explorers. We can either click here or here, so that's both the same. And the data explorer allows you to explore European far-right networks, which can be viewed on a map like it is right now, or a graph. So if you want to see it on a graph, just click here. It needs a few seconds, and then you can see all these interconnections that are right now collected in the database and available. So the navigation tools allows user to see all entities and find detailed information about each of them. So the data bank separates between 4 different entities. That means people, groups, parties, and events. So let's have another example and choose a party. So if we choose British National Party, you will get a short description, right on the top, and afterwards followed by all the national and international interconnections, with Spanish positivity, and at best with a short description. So the filter function above of the map or graph allows users more specific results based either on keywords or selecting a certain country. So let's have a country and choose France. So means selecting France and then please tip on filter. So you can see that adopting. So now you can see all entities regarding to France. You can choose between map and graph. So now it's jumping to France, and here on the left side, now it shows you all entities that belong to France. So it's parties, groups, which is quite a lot, and even more people. So I'm pretty sure you can spend a lot of time exploring European file networks using our data explorer. So let's proceed and take a look to countries. So right now we are covering 12 countries in Europe, means Bulgaria, Croatia, France, Germany, Great Britain, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Russia, Serbia, Spain, and Ukraine. So let's see if we manage to expand them soon. And by choosing a certain country, users can find key facts and learn about recent developments in the far right in specific countries. So right now we are taking a look to Ireland. So you have a brief overview about the entities that are belonging right now to Ireland. If you scroll down, you will receive a country description, means a current situation, and you can expand it or see less. So as well, get the far right as a glance above, and as well as the exploration map. So it's focused already on Ireland, and right now we have 43 entities belonging to Ireland. And the monthly reports you can see below are updated on a monthly basis for all 12 countries. And unfortunately, we didn't manage so far to upload other resources, but I promise that it will be done very soon. So let's proceed with another tool of the website, which you can find when you click on European Parliament. And it's another tool, from my point of view, a quite important tool of Antifascist Europe. And this database was done by Ioanna Meitani. So because the rise of the right is evident not only in the form of aggressive street mobilizations, but also in the electoral field. So at the level of European Parliament, the far right has been working hard to consolidate and highlight its success. The tool gives users the opportunities to search for individual members of the European Parliament, what can be done here, and for national parties, and to follow the evolution through the groups and alliances in the European Parliament, what can be done here. So the database documents and mandates far-right parties and deputies in the European Parliament from 1979 up to today. So let's have an example, and let's choose Alternative für Deutschland. You can see it if you click on show. And it shows you and give you all needed information about the membership in different European fractions right from the beginning as part of the group of European conservatives and reformists until today, and the belonging to the so-called group of identity and democrats. So it needs some time to discover all the functions of this tool, but it's definitely worth to do it, as it contains dozens of relevant information about far-right deputies and parties in the European Parliament. So thanks, and I will now stop screen sharing and give back to Francisco.
Thank you so much, Philip. As could be seen from Philip's demonstration there of the website, there is so much information on the website. You can spend days going through it all already, reading about all of the entities that have been entered into the database, as well as the monthly reports from all of the countries that are currently having regional coordinators contributing their work to this effort. In addition, there is the long list of articles that are already published under a news and analysis on the page. All of this would not be possible without the large network of people who are contributing directly to these efforts through the European Network for Anti-Fascist Monitoring. In the network, as Philip hinted to, we have 12 incredible researchers who are helping out, providing information about their particular countries. Beyond that, we're also looking at this from a pan-European perspective, and we're working across borders among the coordinators, making sure that we map out the interconnections from an international perspective as well as from a local national perspective. As you could see, we are mapping both individuals who are members and participants in the larger far-right fascist ecosystem in countries. We are mapping groups and various constellations under that also includes such things as far-right fascist think tanks, fascist media platforms, and less formalized protest groups. We're also mapping political parties. We have seen an influx of fascist parties and far and alt-right parties in parliaments across Europe as well as in the European Parliament, and we are keeping track of that, and we are keeping track of events and protests that are organized by the far right. We are conscious of the fact that this might be abused almost as an advertisement platform for the far right, and we are putting effort into making sure that it is as useless as possible for that, while still being useless to anti-fascists across the continent. We're therefore not publicizing or publishing about any events prior to the events actually taking place, and we're making sure that we are removing materials that could be seen as promoting far-right action, while still making sure that we have credible sources and making those sources available to researchers, journalists, and others who want to utilize the data set in their work. In order to accomplish this in a legal way, we have collected legal opinions from all of the countries in which we have regional coordinators working with both the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation offices that are responsible for those regions, as well as with legal experts to understand better how we need to be conscious of both privacy legislation as well as press legislation, etc., and make sure we are not subjected to any legal liability, but we're still fairly confident that the map and mapping primarily will be incredibly useful for those who wish to contribute to the European struggle against fascism across the entire continent. As I've touched upon, some of the envisioned users for this are anti-fascists and anti-fascist organizers. We are also trying to keep to a standard where the mapping is useful to academics, where all of the data can be used for scientific research to better understand the far-right ecosystem within that world. We're also looking to make it useful for prosecutors and lawyers in particular who are working in the prosecution of hate crimes, far-right terrorist attacks, and other incidents perpetrated by far-right extremists. By putting it in an international context, we are able to argue that this is part of larger international movements, something that traditionally hasn't been done a lot when it comes to the prosecution of far-right extremists, who tends to be regarded as lone wolves. This mapping once and for all demonstrates that there is no such thing as a lone wolf. All far-right extremists are influenced by each other. They are part of larger networks. They collaborate across borders. And by demonstrating this to prosecution, more far-right, or hope is that more far-right terrorist attacks will be prosecuted as international terrorism under terrorism legislation, rather than largely being written off by legal systems, as we've seen taking place across the continent. In the broadest sense, it's possible to define the far-right movements in white majority locations to consist of people who believe in and promote white supremacy. And the clearest statement of this is perhaps in the 14 words that are embraced by many far-right extremist groups and comes out of the work of fascist David Lane. However, the white supremacy ecosystem consists of a fairly complex set of beliefs that has strong connotations in the form of rampant sexism and homophobia. Sexism and homophobia can, of course, be tied to white supremacy, as the control of women and sexuality equates to the control of reproduction of the white race. Homophobia can thus also be seen as an expression of disdain for those who don't wish to participate in the heteronormative reproduction. It's also an expression of disdain for what's seen as stereotypical feminine characteristics from a perspective focusing on machismo and the need to, through violent means, define the purity of whiteness. The gender element of far-right extremism is complex and further ties to the focus on sexual reproduction, and beliefs held in fringe groups are often aligned with white supremacist ideology, such as the incel community. We already have articles exploring the connections between feminism and far-right extremism up on the website, and it's worth giving those a read. In our definitions, however, we're also accounting for Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that is particularly present in the European far-right. Identitarians and other Eurocentric far-right extremists often present their perspectives as an idea of, or their perspectives on the idea of race as more blurred, choosing instead to focus on the idea of culture. This has been especially visible as far-right extremists across the world have moved away from using a language focused on race and shifted focus towards migration, where the issue of nationalism, religion, and national identity often plays a larger role. This has largely manifested as Islamophobia and hatred against newly arrived migrants, which still often carries very heavy racist undertones. The concept of wanting to defend a misguided concept of European national identity against Islam has been prominent over the past decade, and has been shaped by commonly held beliefs and narratives supported across the world through the global war on terror, which has fueled Islamophobia and the perception of migrants from Muslim majority countries as an existential security threat. In order to legitimize Islamophobic beliefs, one often hear that arguments and hatred against migration in Europe, especially as it stems from the alt and far right, is rooted in legitimate religious criticism. While we firmly believe no power structure, including religion, is beyond criticism, this argument quickly falls apart and displays ignorance of theology and the diversity that exists within Islam. And statements along the lines of "they look Muslim," which frequently is seen on the European far right as justification for discrimination, supports this. On this basis, as well as commonly used language to describe the issue of far-right violence, such as racially and ethnically motivated terrorism, fascism, Nazism, and racism, we argue that racism and white supremacy is the defining factor of the groups and actions that we are mapping throughout this project. The mapping is quite extensive. The definition is quite broad, but we see this as an issue across all the continent. And the range of subjects falling within the scope is huge. We will therefore keep publishing new information on the website continuously. There will be new articles and analysis. There will be monthly reports from each of the countries on a monthly basis, as well as consistent and constant updates to the database and the graphs that Philip showed us. It's worth mentioning that this is just the beginning. We have so far just mapped the top of the iceberg, and now is when the hard work to keep up this effort and continue building on this begins. Thank you all so much. I will now be handing over to Josip Jagic for a panel.
Floor is yours, Liz Fekete, Ioanna Meitani, Eliza Rutynowska, and Josip to talk about countering the far right, anti-fascists, and civil society in solidarity against the European shift of the right.
Hey, that's great mural. It's really going great. Hello, everybody. In my name and the name of the panelists, we're going to try to do a panel that we kind of divided in three parts. The first part, we're going to try to somehow sketch the situation in Europe regarding the far right and what are the conditions that give the rise to far right in Europe. And then the second part, we'll try to somehow point out to some positive practices how to confront the far right and how to confront the far right. And the third part will be reserved for the questions and comments, and my colleague Maria Johanna from the head of RLS office in Athens will then present your questions and comments. During the panel you can pose the questions and comments in the chat, and yeah, in the third part we'll try to somehow summarize them and present them and present them. So without any further ado, yeah, as I said, we'll try to have a conversation between the four of us. This is the first time that we are, for me, it's the first time that we are doing it on Zoom. So let's see how that thing will go. Hopefully we won't interrupt ourselves like we would do it if we would do the conversation in pub or somewhere more relaxing. But yeah, maybe it's gonna feel a bit unnatural, but what can we do? We live in such times, yeah. So Liz, maybe it's the best way to start with you. In your book that's called Europe's Fault Lines, Racism and the Rise of the Right, that was issued in 2019, you insist that in order to talk about nationalism, racism, and the right, we must have in mind the context of uneven development within the EU and the relationships between the core and periphery. I mean, not only in EU, but Europe itself. I must admit that I love your comparative approach that you took there. And for the starters, could you drive us through where we are today when we talk about the right in Europe and how this happened? And Did the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic fortify these dynamics, or did it drastically change them? Let's try to start with you, huh?
Oh, blimey, Joseph, you've really thrown out quite a few questions there.
Yeah.
And I'll try and keep them all in my mind, and I will try and answer everything that you've said there. But just to first to add a little bit here about this whole idea of uneven development and core periphery relations. And I think that's really, really important that we start there with this project, because what I've seen sometimes in the past in comparative approaches is that it can end up creating a league table of, you know, good and bad countries, and normally it's the sort of Eastern European countries that sort of fall to the bottom of the league table, which is actually quite sort of chauvinistic, I think, because, you know, there are different sorts of fascisms, different sorts of corruption. There may be in a lot of countries in-your-face corruption, but certainly in the country where I am, UK, there's a lot of financialized corruption, which is really important to have in the picture. So no league tables within a comparative approach. And I suppose Josip mentioned my book, and one of the things that I talked about there is the whole way that when we're looking at fascism, we have to keep capitalism at the center of our minds. And this is one of the problems that we faced over the last 10 years in the anti-fascist movement, that we've had an anti-extremist industry that has come to the fore that doesn't look at capitalism, doesn't look at these plutocrats who are behind a lot of this terrible things going on, doesn't look at the state, which means that we're looking at a model of anti-fascism that takes state racism and the actions of the state out of the picture. Just to give you two examples, the war on refugees. The war on refugees is a global war, and globally, the instrument of that war here is the EU, largely in many of the countries that I'm looking in. So if we look at the whole question of what's happening on the Poland-Belarus border, we will see that that is an EU response, and it's an EU border response that is actually encouraging far-right vigilantism. And in so many border regions, there is cooperation between far-right vigilantes and, let's say, the riot police and the anti-immigration police. Let's take another example, structural adjustment programs, austerity programs around Europe. This is what creates uneven development, which puts burdens on countries to adjust their economies in the favor of the core countries, and which then creates the conditions for nationalism and authoritarianism. Bjørn mentioned the interconnectedness of a network of fascist movements, but let's not forget the interconnectedness of those far-right national movements and the authoritarianism and nationalism of the mainstream. Just going to briefly mention what I think are the three enablers of the far right today: the political enablers, the intellectual enablers, and the societal enabler. And I'm not going to do the state of play thing. Fritz did that brilliantly. And I'd like to say that I think it would be a really good idea if Fritz's speech was actually written up and put on the website, because it was very, very clear. So Fritz has already mentioned the fact that we're living in a situation where we have extreme right political parties in the mainstream who are creating this fertile climate for the far right. But it's not just the extreme right. The whole of the mainstream has gone to a nativist agenda. And we're talking social democrat parties as well as conservative parties. So, you know, this nativist agenda, national preference, putting our own people first, that all feeds into this. So, and what we're seeing at the center as well, obviously this is quite clear in Hungary and Poland, is the rise of the Christian right, the ultra-conservatives and the religious forcing, pushing demographic arguments, a birth rate agenda, reproductive racism, as my colleague Sophia Siddiqui puts it. So what we've got here is a really worrying climate where misogyny and white supremacy interlink in the mainstream, and are then played out on violence on the ground, so that migrants, refugees, ethnic minorities, feminists and sexual minorities are in the front line of attack. So these are the political enablers, but then we also have the intellectual enablers, the arsonists, the intellectual arsonists who throw their words into the fire. I noticed on the chat, a lot of people were really happy that Bjørn made the point about lone wolves. We don't want any of this discussion about lone wolves, but also we want into the discussion the whole fact that far-right murderers and terrorists are created. They're not born, they're created by this climate in the middle. So when we have people like Renaud Camus with his great replacement theory, Eric Zemmour, presidential candidate in France, with his whole sort of, oh God, the Western world is in decline because of all these women running around being feminists, and all these Muslims having too many children, etc. And then we've got the race and intelligence people like Charles Murray, the US theorist who believes that Black people have a lower IQ. All these people are coming into the mix, these intellectual incendiaries. But this is why the point that Fritz made again, that we're looking at here in this project at intellectual and financial exchange. We've got to do much more to look at who are funding these people. And there's a lot of work done in the US, which is very, very important here. Very good book. I recommend it to everyone. Free Speech and Koch Money, Manufacturing a Campus Culture War, recently published by Pluto Press. And we're seeing the Koch Network, David Koch, the plutocrat, the Koch Network, Peter Thiel, founder of PayPal. All these people are bringing these intellectual incendiaries to Europe. Finally, the societal enablers. And here, I promise, Joseph, I'll get to your point about COVID. We've got to be clear that there is a social crisis out there. The misery is absolutely intense. But also there's a great atomization of society created by this free market, this constant neoliberal focus on market best, market, everything good, market, everything good about the market, everything bad about the welfare state and protection. So what we've got to realize is this atomization is so fertile for the far right, promoting their sort of doctrine of our individual civil liberties are under threat by the public health emergency over COVID. But we've got to be very, very careful here, very, very careful that we don't play into authoritarianism. Because basically, with the COVID, with the public health emergency, the whole powers have gone to the police in managing a public health emergency. So there's an element here with the frustration that people feel around the pandemic. But we must be careful that we do not play into the strengthening of the authoritarian core. Our battle today is not just against the far right, it's against the authoritarianism and nationalism at the centre. I'm sorry, I feel I've gone on far too long. That's all for me.
Hey, thank you very much. You were completely on point and within the time limit that we kind of envisaged. Thank you very much for this kind of overview and tour around Europe regarding the far right. Eliza, Liz was just speaking about political enablers, and she was speaking about the cooperation between the state and especially its repressive apparatus with the far right, and that they somehow give rise to the far right. I thought that this was something characteristic also in Poland's case, but you as an activist and as a PhD candidate, you deal with the degradation of the rule of law and how that dynamics goes hand in hand with the rise of right in Poland. Could you walk us through the rise of the authoritarianism and right in Poland? Can we extrapolate any part of this particular political dynamics on a wider European context?
Thanks a lot for these questions. And I'm actually it's an honor to be here and to be able to speak with all of you. Unfortunately, I cannot say that I am proud to be talking about what is going on in my country at the moment. I am coming to you from, I'm speaking to you from a country that has been a victim of racism, of fascism, and that is what makes it all the more worrisome and absolutely overwhelming that we do have people here who are ready to salute the far right instead of actually using our own history and actually listening to our grandparents. I come from a generation that has been raised on stories of how the entire country was actually plowed through by fascists, how we lost so many millions of people, not only of Jewish descent or any minorities descent, but also the majority as well. So I have no idea why we are looking at the rise of the alt-right as we are seeing it today. Absolutely, I think that I always begin and end every single one of these speeches with the same quote, that this is just a blueprint. What is going on in Poland is just a blueprint for all the other countries where populists might rise. And mind you, we are at a very nervous point in history once again, seeing as we are coming into a crisis after the COVID pandemic, and we will be entering that crisis soon enough. I always say that this is not it yet. The aftermath of the pandemic will be an amazing opportunity for populists to rise to power again. There will be a need to find a new enemy. There will be a need to find a new enemy who is responsible for the loss of jobs, whereas many jobs will now be become Zoomified, as I call it. So suddenly we will have populists saying that, look, you're losing your jobs, but really it's not, the effect of the pandemic, but perhaps it's the effect of immigrants taking over your jobs. We are looking at people who are afraid. Fear is also a very an element that was used by the populists in Poland to gain ground. Back in 2015, when this governing party actually came into power, it used immigrants. It used the immigrant issue, the refugee issue, calling it a protection against the wave of illegal immigration, as they called it, and it was very effective. That was, of course, put on top the ever so proud words of sovereignty, independence, a nationalist agenda as well. Nationalists don't even call themselves nationalists anymore here. They call themselves nationals. So they don't use the word nationalistic. They use the word patriotic. And that is what you're actually combating. You're actually, your own narrative, you find yourself actually saying that, well, they're calling themselves patriots, but they're not really patriots. But really, the message that is being conveyed to the broad public is that you are speaking out against patriotism. So that was the agenda that this populistic party has actually built its power on. It has managed to convince a vast amount of people that a united Europe was really a Europe of non-sovereign countries, that there was going to be some sort of ruling, Leviathan over all of us. And this actually sunk into the historic memory of a lot of people in the country, which kind of mirrored our past relationship with Moscow, for example. So that was also drawn into the narrative. As you can see, what I'm trying to show you is the amount of jumbled historical and populistic narratives that are being thrown in together to create this kind of turmoil and this boiling pot that finally did boil over. And what we are left with is actually a lot of alt-right groups, also, of course, calling themselves nationalist patriotic, also calling themselves, the national guardians. The guardians of the country that have become involved not only in issues of immigration or on our border, for that matter. However, they have also become very much involved in issues of women's rights, in the fight for our reproductive rights that have been taken away from us in 2020. And there have been actually guards that were and watch guards that were organized by publicly funded alt-right leaders that are actually funded by the Ministry of Culture. And we are talking about millions of zlotych that are being actually pumped into those organizations. And these organizations are vastly known for example, protecting, of course, the quote unquote entries to churches against peaceful protesters. And that actually means, for example, throwing women down the steps of these churches. I myself have been one of the lawyers engaged in a network of lawyers who are actually tackling these issues as well. And the stories that we hear, for example, one of my clients actually was burned by this guard that was inside a church, and she was trying to access the church to peacefully protest. And now what happened was actually they took out a lighter and they burned her hand. This was not actually filed as the prosecutor's office did not actually initiate an investigation into that event. That is something that ties us into the bigger problem of a politicized public prosecutor's office. Something that goes hand in hand with actually arming the alt-right is to complete the fixation of controlling everything, the fixation of control. So right now, the ruling party actually is in control of all of the public sphere, the entire public sphere. So the public prosecutor's office, the constitutional tribunal, the government, of course, the parliament, the president's office as well. So right now, and we are basically falling victim to this monopoly that has been launched over the entire country. And mind you, only 30% of the population actually voted for this party. So their claims as to the fact that they were chosen by the majority of the people is also false. However, right now, I remember us talking before this event and how actually terrifying it is to state that even though we do have institutions that are supposedly still named as they were named, for example, the public prosecutor's office, the police stations, we know what might happen if we file specific denouncements of crimes, for example, committed by those supported by the government. Now, just to finish up on my part, I always compare what this government, what populists are doing with the alt-right to actually holding onto a very strained leash of a pit bull. And now, as long as the pit bull is actually facing, the enemies that they choose, they're happy with it. But they have no idea that that dog can turn around any second. They have absolutely no control over what they are actually cultivating. And that is something that worries me to the paramount, seeing as we are looking at alt-right groups also having ties with Moscow, with many other, not only national groups. This is becoming a transnational issue, and something that we should all address as Europeans, as a society, as a European society, and as a global society for that matter. I'd like to end with that. And thank you once again for the amazing work that you are doing as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the answers and this insight into the Poland's dynamics. Let's move on to the Greece. Johanna, we all remember the stellar rise of the Golden Dawn amidst the horrible financial crisis that was raging in Greece in 2009. We knew that the help from EU and the Troika only supported the growing economic despair of the people in Greece, but could you talk how the far right in Greece was mainstreamed during that period to the level that at a certain point Golden Dawn became the third most popular party, political party in Greece?
Thank you, Josip. And thanks to the team of ENAM for inviting me to the launch of this significant project of anti-fascist monitoring. The site is great. Many, many congratulations and keep up the good work. Yes, I can say a few things about back then. It is now 10 years ago, but I think the story is still interesting. And of course, in Greece, Golden Dawn is now behind bars, but their ideas are not are still in the society. So, as you said, amidst the economic crisis in Greece, the far right, back then in the form of the organization Golden Dawn, became spokesperson for widespread discontent, anger, and frustration. They also offered a kind of mental relief, pointing the immigrants as scapegoats. It's like Eliza said, they will invent every time a new enemy. It was back then the immigrants, they are now as well. So they are pointing the immigrants as scapegoats, as responsible for the ills of that time: unemployment, poverty, deterioration of social security and social bonds. They also offered a kind of practical relief, a relief valve for hate and anger by organizing attacks and pogroms, by bullying immigrants and refugees on the street, by showing and giving body power to the weak. They also offered a new sense of belonging by bringing again nation at the core of the rhetoric, this time the Greek Orthodox nation against the alleged Muslim invaders. It was a typical method of exploiting an exceptional circumstance like the economic crisis, combining it with the circumstance of refugee flows and presenting themselves as guardians of nation, religion, and culture. Like they always do, they exploited the crisis generated by neoliberal capitalism without, of course, disagreeing with policies that generate this crisis. At that time, the ruling Conservative Party could only profit by that anti-immigrant sentiment and did not react to the rise of far-right violence and rhetoric. It's what Liz pointed out as the political enablers. On the contrary, it brooded the serpent's egg, also with the help of the media, which gave airtime to the thugs of Golden Dawn, presented them in a lifestyle manner, showed pictures of their tattoos, invited them to talk to shows, treated them all in all as the bad boys of politics, let them say what serious politicians did not dare articulate. Once, to give you an example, a pro-government journalist claimed that a serious Golden Dawn was needed in the political system. The media here in Greece was a very important enabler of the far right. I don't know where we can place the media as enablers. Are they political, societal enablers? Maybe both. So the serpent's egg hatched, and the neo-Nazi group of Golden Dawn, disguised as a political party, reached almost 7% of the electoral vote in 2012 and secured 18 MPs in parliament. And of course, all the benefits of a parliamentary party, including state money. In the past 10 years, with the refugee flows being a key issue for Greece, anti-immigrant discourse has been normalized and widely socially disseminated. Hate speech has combined with extreme racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and harsh anti-communist rhetoric, with the political spectrum remaining significantly polarized to this day. Here you can, it's everyday practice or everyday discourse, words like the wave of immigrants, illegal immigrants, they are always called illegal immigrants, as Eliza said also for Poland. The damage done 10 years ago with the mainstreaming of far-right ideas is still obvious. The Golden Dawn leadership team was brought to trial in 2015 and was eventually convicted as a criminal organization and imprisoned in October 2020. We'll talk about this later, about the trial of Golden Dawn. The far right's overall electoral reach in 2019 appeared to be in the decline, and they were left outside parliament in the 2019 elections. However, the far right's real support base is significantly higher. Far right anti-immigrant sentiment and policies fuels the conservative government's agenda. Moreover, and this is quite important for Greece, with the official Golden Dawn party behind bars, most Greeks are resting on the belief that the far right is over and done with. A large part of society is unaware of the danger which far right movements, mostly anti-systemic, pose for Greek social coherence and the upholding core social values. In reality, the far right in Greece is accumulating power and strength, even within systemic channels, politically and otherwise. Here we had two circumstances, let's say, that gave fruitful soil to far right formations. It was the Macedonian issue. I think you know what I'm talking about, the issue of North Macedonia, about the name of North Macedonia, and the strong anti-vaccine movement. In political terms, and I'll close with this, the conservative government prefers to shift to the right in order to gain the votes of the far right and remain into power, than to support more inclusive policies that would bring it closer to a more social and democratic agenda, the agenda of its political opponents. And it is here where I see the threat. On the one hand, we have overall in Europe, a far right dressed in new clothes, proteic, which means it's ready to take any shape fits the circumstances. On the other hand, the conservative governments prefer to tolerate some level of far right violence on the streets. This violence is anyway targeted against the others, the immigrants and refugees, than to lose power. It's how they enable, as Liz so brilliantly sketched, the far right. In Greece and in Europe, the far right is not considered a threat, and this is dangerous. Thank you.
Okay. But since you are also a founding member of the GoldenDawnWatch, maybe we should continue with this. You touched upon it in your first in this first remark. I mean, the situation of the Golden Dawn Watch and the whole outcome of the Golden Dawn and the trial of the Golden Dawn is a bit interesting in a sense, because we heard that the state is enabling the far right. And I think that this is completely right, completely right to state. But there is also this one thing, especially in this case, is that the state here in this case, somehow, you're going to tell us about it, but it seems that the state did the right thing here, and the state kind of constrained the far right, especially in the case of the Golden Dawn.
Yes, you're right. The states, let's make the difference between the state and the governments. The state is one thing, and the government is another thing. Not always, they are intertwined, but anyway, yes, the state decided to play the role it should play after, let's say, at least 3 to 4 years of far-right violence, which enjoyed a kind of immunity. So, okay, let's talk about the state prosecution of Golden Dawn and about the initiative of GoldenDawnWatch. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. And I wanted to say here, as I say every time I talk about GoldenDawnWatch, that it was inspired, and thank you again, by NSU Watch in Germany. The outcome of the Golden Dawn trial was a great triumph for the anti-fascist movement and for democracy in Greece. There were 68 defendants in this trial. 51 of them were found guilty. The leadership of Golden Dawn was found guilty of directing a criminal organization, and a total of 41 persons were imprisoned. Golden Dawn, which had been presenting itself as a political party, at the same time escalating its criminal activity on the streets, was convicted as a criminal organization. The same media that we were talking about just before, that mainstreamed these same persons 8 years ago, on the day of their conviction, were talking about bloodthirsty criminals and showing pictures of their arrest. Even though we can moan about the same media playing the double role, the fact is that through the mainstream television channels, radio stations, sites, and newspapers, Golden Dawn was stigmatized as a criminal organization. Having lost their electoral power and having been on trial for 5 long years, the society forgot about the bad boys of Golden Dawn and took notice of them again at the end of the trial, this time as criminals. Their imprisonment and their stigmatization is reason enough to triumph. Okay, let me say here a few things about your concerning your question, how the state intervened. There were 2 things. I think after the murder of Pavlos Fissas in 2013, Golden Dawn murdered an anti-fascist singer, Pavlos Fissas, in a district of Athens. And this was not tolerated by society, let's say, because it was the murder of a Greek person. They had murdered an immigrant, Saksat Lukman, some months ago. And it was a murder, a cold-blooded murder of a Greek person. And the society was shocked. This is one thing. I think the government back then was shocked as well, because I think they started thinking that Golden Dawn has no, cannot be restricted, and it does not have any fear anymore. And maybe the government thought that politicians or journalists could be the next target. So they decided to say stop, to put an end to this. The third thing was the uprising of the anti-fascist movement. I think the struggle against the far right is given on multiple levels. The judicial level is one of them. On that level, the struggle in Greece was successful. And it was not only on that level, because this success, their imprisonment, had other consequences. The state funding was seized, their offices were closed, the members abandoned the ship, there were many internal divisions, the organization collapsed. The once mighty thugs were delegitimized, far-right violence was labeled as criminal for some time. Now it's back on the streets again. So the third thing I think that contributed to the prosecution of Golden Dawn was the uprising of the anti-fascist movement, which was widely mobilized after the murder of Pavlos Fissas. This murder led to the arrest of the perpetrators and to the trial of Golden Dawn, led the state to press charges. And the state gave an end to this immunity it had offered for years, because the Greek police, widely infiltrated by neo-Nazis, was just, let's say, looking at them doing their pogroms, doing their attacks, sometimes also facilitating these attacks. And we have also quite a few examples of police stations being very closely intertwined with Golden Dawn. So about this initiative of GoldenDawnWatch, The trial was about to start in the spring of 2015. And we, a group of concerned people, were mobilized and we set up the initiative of GoldenDawnWatch. It was clear that the media would not give full coverage to the trial, that they would try to keep it out of the news, out of public attention. We wanted to document every single day of it, write about it, provide information. And that's what we did. We kept minutes of the court sessions, published them real time on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website. We became the go-to point of reference for the trial, which lasted 5 years. Why was this a good practice? Because we are supposed to talk about good practices here. After all these years and having talked a lot about it, I think I can summarize it in one sentence, because we kept the eye of society on the trial. Every interested person could follow in detail what was going on inside the courtroom, where the most important trial of the last 40 years was taking place, with active members of parliament as defendants. When only 1 or 2 newspapers were covering the trial, we were always there, every day, always reporting. We became known, we were called to speak about the trial, the judges knew about us, people knew about us. They knew we were watching, and through us, society was watching. We believe that we contributed to the importance of the trial. If it had been an invisible trial, it would have lost some of its significance. This goes for all trials that are being monitored by civil society. Monitoring adds to the significance, regardless of the outcome. Monitoring is an act of documentation and commemoration. It is our duty towards the victims of Nazi terrorism and a legacy to the next generations of anti-fascists.
It's interesting because what you described is this, let's say, very common practice of the anti-fascist or the progressive forces, like pressure from outside the state, pressuring the state from the outside. The other day I was on the panel, there is a conversation between Slavoj Žižek and progressive philosopher Srećko Horvat here in Zagreb, and Žižek said, painted a bleak picture, bleak political picture, or contemporary political picture, saying that today, like when we see the mainstream politics and political field, we see basically centrists hold the power, and in the contemporary societies, from the standpoint of the parties and party politics, we only see the fascists and the far right presenting themselves as sort of the oppositional force. There is left is really in some very bad spot, in a sense, lacking the imagination and lacking the politics, and like he's saying that he said that basically the plateau of the left is welfare, social democrat welfare state from the 20th century, and this is basically the plateau of the political imagination, and that's really a problematic force. So basically, where we kind of find left and where we see this political potential from the left, we see it basically outside the mainstream political sphere, like party political sphere. So, and what it does is this pressure from outside to the state in order to hoping that the state will do the right thing. And I think that when you think about this, when you think about these movements and this kind of political practices, Eliza, I think that one of the most inspiring and the monumental movements that we have seen is the mass mobilization of women in Poland. You were talking about the challenges or the confrontation that the women in Poland had to persevere during these protests. You even mentioned your defendee being burned, which is an unbelievable story. Could you maybe talk us through this mobilization? How do you see it in a sense of what it did achieve, and what do you hope will it achieve? What are the potential of that kind of mobilizations, let's say in the near future?
Well, what I do hope it will achieve is also kind of writing into this idea of a swinging pendulum that once it swings very right into the alt-right, it might just as well swing back into a possible normal liberal approach to women's rights and human rights, because women's rights are human rights, as we all know here, but that doesn't seem to be the message that a lot of people are getting on the everyday basis. So the mobilization was actually launched back in 2016 when the first ideas of limiting the already very extraneous abortion laws were put in place. So that was when women first took to the streets and marched with umbrellas. The umbrella became the symbol that that has been a companion to the protesters ever since. However, right now, what I would say is now the scarf has become more of a friend, because these protests actually took place in the freezing cold and when we were also all masked up. What I feel has changed over the years, however, is the approach of the state towards the protesters as well. The overall acceptance of violence, not only when it comes to how the alt-right counter-protesters were acting, but also to how the police reacted to the protests as well. So at one point, I remember this very clearly, and it was extremely upsetting, was the kettling method was used on protesters during one of these protests, and actually suddenly a person who was in civil clothing took out a baton and started hitting people around him, and everybody thought this was somebody from the alt-right, alt-right counter-protesters. Apparently it was an anti-terrorist that was actually sent in with a anti-terrorist group of police officers into the peaceful protest that was what was taking place there. So we're at a point where we don't know whether we're dealing with the alt-right or with our own police forces, who of course are being protected by more strenuous laws as well. But back to your question, how has this actually helped? Well, definitely it has actually helped us raise conscience and around the country, and the knowledge of not only the women's rights that are available to Polish women, but also when it comes to rights of peaceful protesters, of how they can act, how they can counteract also against far-right activity. We have become much more stable in our approach as to what type of country a modern democracy should be. And we know right now that a lot of people have started to understand the difference between freedom of speech and hate speech. Thanks to these protests as well. So a rise in kind of this social conscience, I would say, and knowledge has been achieved. I cannot say that these protests will make the government back down, unfortunately, or change the laws into a more liberal way. Of course not. However, we have brought lawyers have brought the case to the European Court of Human Rights. So therefore, I know that this is an ongoing case that has been communicated to the government, and perhaps Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights will help us kind of create a new understanding of the right to end the pregnancy than has been so far. And perhaps it will make other European societies much more aware of the fact that these things can happen under their own noses and even within their own borders. So kind of going back to your first question that you asked me in the first round, can this happen anywhere else? Of course it can happen anywhere else, even in those countries that actually have very liberal laws at the moment. This is not a given. And that's something that has to be really understood. Democracy is not given once and for all. And suddenly, something that I strongly oppose is using the term illiberal democracies. I know this is a tendency to kind of mock what has been going on in Hungary or Poland, but I feel like bonding these two words together has brought more less good, more of this misunderstanding. So I think that we should be talking about a liberal democracy or not a democracy at all, and that's what we're dealing with in Poland right now. So even though these protests, unfortunately, I don't believe will lead to legislation changing unless the government changes, I feel that this has given a lot of power to the Polish people, to Polish women, and they know that they're not alone. And that's also thanks to a vast majority of European countries supporting us and actually reaching out with specific help. But again, this has been a movement that has come from the bottom up, and it's not a civil society's role to protect the citizens against its own state. And that's exactly kind of, in a democracy, we should know that the state is there to protect rights of minorities, to make sure that, you know, everyone's rights are honored. And unfortunately, right now, what we're doing is constantly kind of reorganizing to protect the citizens against a state that right now has put a target on our backs.
We're gonna keep in this manner. We're gonna continue in this manner. So Liz, you work as you're an author and also a director of the Institute for Race Relations in London, where you monitor the far right, but you also monitor the resistance to the racism. So only the best questions for you. How do we form a broad alliances that not only defend against far right, but also go beyond and transform the social relations of power? I mean, we heard from Eliza right now that basically, in this case, we have the state which threatens its own citizens. And I think that there are liberal democracies, but there are also a number of different democracies and states and especially these authoritarian democracies like in Poland, which are kind of you know, they are here, they are our historical and political reality. And I think that in order to kind of tackle that, in order to change that, I think that the state is the target point in this sense. And it's a huge Mount Everest or a huge mountain to climb, especially when we think about the position of left today, progressive left, that is. So there are lots of questions and pick up something and let's try to continue in this way and try to think about the possible positive political practices to use in confronting the far right and yeah, building the societies that work for all and not just the few.
Josip, they're not the best questions. They're the hardest questions. You've worked me up into a sweat. I hope everybody out there is feeling really sorry for me. After that.
I was sarcastic. It's as we talked, it's $1 million, not one question, but questions.
It's certainly $1 million question. And before I answer it, I want to just say something about democracy. You see, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but you know, I want to sound grounded. There's this whole thing, it doesn't matter if you're an optimistic or a pessimist, you must be a grounded realist. And I don't feel that we're living in democracy. We're certainly not living in parliamentary democracies, in representative democracy. It's been completely hollowed out. And there, you know, it's what I said about the market state. The market is ruling, the market is determining parliamentary policies. But on this $1 million question of theory, how can we move towards theory and alliances? I just want to say that I'm against top-down theories. Eliza mentioned the bottom-up movements in Poland. And I mean, we've all been absolutely gobsmacked by the actions of women's strike, feminist movements around reproductive rights, for actions of Polish women and others at the borders in support of refugees. So these are the resistances that we can build on, and what we want is a unity between theory and practice. So the comments I want to make is not laying out a Bible or a blueprint, because I don't believe in that. I just want to talk about priorities, possibilities, and challenges. And where can we see a cause for building and hope? And, you know, I was very without manners at the beginning of the last question round, because I didn't say thank you to the organisers. Thank you for inviting me. So I'll try and make up for that by saying some nice things about this initiative, in the sense that I do see the initiative as a cause for hope. And I was sorry to give a name check for Fritz. Hello, Fritz. I said something nice about you before I say something else again. I was very pleased that Fritz made the comment at the beginning about this isn't replacing the fantastic work people are doing on the national level. It's about trying to add some value, something specific that this initiative can give. And I think that there's all these academic departments out there, there's all these people in sort of ivory towers, sorry, not all academics are in ivory towers, but you have really good scholar activists, and that's great. But this doesn't have to be an academic research project. It's got to be interventionist. It's about saying that we've got to interrupt the counterinsurgency of the extra-parliamentary far right, and mindful of what Eliza has just told us, and what we know from our own history is the police protect the fascists. So what we need is a team of researchers who are going to we don't want any more Utøya Islands, we don't want Hal, we don't want Hanno, we don't want murders, we don't want Pavlos Visas, we don't want the refugees and migrants to die as they are dying. So how can we interrupt this? How can we get research out there that is practical and empirically based? And that's why this initiative is important. We've been trying to do that in a small way at the Institute. We have a regular bi-weekly newsletter. We produce a calendar on racism and resistance, where we talk about not just what the far right are doing, but what the anti-fascists are doing, and we bring that out every 2 weeks. So this initiative is good, but we also have to be mindful that, you know, when any new initiative comes about, there are people who feel vulnerable because they feel that their efforts, their work might not be, celebrated enough or respected enough. And I want to say here that we should be saluting all those who have kept the faith over the last 10 or so years, when, as I've said, we've had this top-down anti-extremism industry. All those people who don't have resources, who aren't well-financed, who can't go to their government for money, but keep the faith. And I mean, I've been inspired, obviously, by an NSU watch, by GoldenDawnWatch. I mean, that whole business of going to the court every day, you're not paid to do it. It's all right for me. I've got a day job. I'm paid. But these people who went every single day to the courts to monitor. And I also think of people like my good colleagues, comrades in the Never Again Association in Poland, who kept the faith before we had an upsurge in struggle. What else do we need to do? I think we can take hope from people who are working around, in a broad sense, let's call it political education around history, a challenge. You see, you know, when we talk about colonialism, when we talk about authoritarianism, when we talk about fascism, people want to say that's a thing of the past. You know, we don't have colonialism anymore, but actually colonialism is a structure of domination, which is around and visible all around us in our daily life, in the buildings, in the statues. And this is why we celebrate in the UK the recent legal judgment around the Colston Four. Who were the Colston Four? They were 4 young people who were acquitted only a couple of weeks ago of pulling down a statue in Bristol of the slave trader Edward Colston. Now, Colston was deputy governor of the 18th century Royal African Company, which was the most prolific slave trading entity in British history. This wealth was built on the enslavement of 84,000 men, women, and children, and he was complicit in the death of 19,000 of them. And there was a statue for him in Bristol, and it was during the Black Lives Matter insurgency. It was pulled down and dumped into the river, and the legal verdict acquitting the Colston Four was the basis that this statue was an indecent display. So I think that's really, really important to look at verdicts like that. I want to just finish on what might hold us back. And I think what has been holding us back over the last years is an ability to form a more inclusive political culture, which allows for cross-fertilization of struggles. Sometimes those of us on the left, we put on our class blinkers, which means that, you know, we think we're on the left, we've studied fascism, we know that fascism is an attack on the working class. So we think that, you know, we're the experts, but actually fascism is what fascism does. And people who experience fascism, who are daily attacked and intimidated, and as Johanna said in her brilliant presentation, live in this culture of fear. They know what fascism is because they have experienced this. So we mustn't have class blinkers. We mustn't be frightened of cross-fertilization of struggles. We mustn't be purist in our politics. And we also have to recognize that our anti-fascism isn't just about being anti-Nazi. That's one of the mistakes that we made in the UK historically, where we fought the Nazis, but we didn't recognize that fascism is more than fighting the Nazis on the streets. It's more than just the Antifa, because fascism is a whole approach to human life and human dignity. The Nazis coined the expression life unworthy of life. So I see anti-fascism as what the search and rescue captains and crew do in the Mediterranean. Refugees themselves are heroic people, people of great courage, and people who assist them also show great courage. They too keep the faith, and they are part of the anti-fascist tradition and culture. So let's create an inclusive political culture that recognizes that class is different today than it was in the 1930s.
Thank you very much. I was writing down what you were saying. So we came to the conclusion of the second round. We are entering the third round. And for the third round, I would like to invite Maria Johanna, the head of office of RLS Athens, to summarize your questions and comments, and to have a little discussion at the end.
Thank you, Josip. Yes, hello to everyone from my side, and thanks to everyone involved in this project, and big thanks to Liz, Eliza, and Ioanna for your interesting and important contribution. There have been a lot of comments and questions. Many questions were related to the website itself and have been answered already, or will be answered hopefully in the near future. We had a lot of positive and encouraging comments from the participants. Thanks a lot for that. It's really needed after such a long time of working on this, and now being able to present it, we feel encouraged to continue. No questions have been submitted addressed to one particular panelist. But there are two questions that I would like to still throw into the round and address to all of you, because I think they are quite important. They have been touched a little bit here and then, but I would like to address these questions to the panelists and maybe also to one of our colleagues from the project. The one question is referring to the political center, and the question on how the political costs to politicians of the political center could be increased for those of the center tapping into far-right attitudes and narratives. That is the one question. And the other question that I think is very, very crucial and important to all of us is the big question of how can we involve young people. This question has not been specified, but I think it is addressed to us as ENAM, but also to the panelists and representatives of their organizations. So I would like to address this question to all of you. Who wants to start? Maybe Johanna. Let me say one more thing. Talking about ENAM, there are young people involved already. It's not like a bunch of old people sitting there thinking about the future. But still, engaging and involving the young generation, of course, is crucial. And therefore, we should discuss and think about how to do this. And maybe you have a couple of ideas from your own experience. Maybe, Johanna, you would like to start.
Not really, but anyway, since you ask, because this thing with the young people is the $1 million question.
All of them are. All of the questions are $1 million questions.
Yeah. What I have seen from my experience is that young people can very well, are very keen on supporting a sort of campaigns. So if you launch a nice campaign with, I don't know, nice stickers or referring to good music or something that talks to them, then they are very keen to, you know, to disseminate it, to be on your side. The other thing I would say from my experience from the NGO where I am active right now, which is called Signal, researching and confronting the far right. Unfortunately, the webpage is not available in English yet, but it will be soon. Anyway, we have once done a discussion, let's say a panel discussion. It was more relaxed with young people about the memory of the junta in Greece. And it was very interesting what they had to say. They were people that were born after the junta was over. So the first thing is ask young people. And the second thing is just, you know, include them in your teams. We are now working together with 22-year-old woman. She has great ideas. Just, I think, include young people in the teams is one of the things we have to do. Okay, to inspire them, you have to know them better, and you will know them better if they are on your teams, I think.
I don't want to forget the first part of the question about how we can do more to deal with politicians who enable the whole far-right discourse. I think probably Eliza, as a lawyer, can answer that a lot better than me, because I think we exhaust all the legal remedies that we can, but at the same time, not solely concentrating on legal remedies, maybe looking at being careful also around the whole free speech debate, that we don't end up getting isolated in terms of our internal political national cultures, saying, oh, we're all against free speech and all that stuff. But I think we can do a hell of a lot more with art, with creative interventions, with performance, outside Parliament, outside, you know, places like that, and also more with humour, I would say. So legal remedies, but political education through art and creative means. On the young people, I think I'm probably the oldest person on the panel here, so probably I've got no right to speak, but I have been taught by the young people in my office, which they will laugh if I start now sort of saying, oh, we've got to have a social media strategy, you've got to have Twitter, you've got to have Instagram, all these things is really important. But I think it's also a question of recognising that people have different routes into politics. As a young person, my route was through anti-fascism and militant anti-fascism. For young people today, you know, this isn't true across the region. I can only talk from my experience, but it's going to be Black Lives Matter. It's going to be decolonization movements. It's going to be climate change. So we have to think about ways of making our material relevant to people where they're at. But at the same time, intergenerational political dialogue is really important.
So just jumping in on this question, I think that there was something that was very well said by Johanna in her presentation about the role of how the media portrayed the Golden Dawn. And you use this word, this phrase, the bad boys of politics. And what I see in Poland is that a lot of centered politicians tend to like interacting with such bad boys because that gets them clicks, that gets them media attention. If you go on a talk show with an expert and you go and talk about, I don't know, the abortion issue or the question of the country's response to immigration, et cetera, you will get a very merit-based discussion where you have to have knowledge as well to participate in a discussion like that. Whereas if you go onto a talk show with a dude just goes on and on about, you know, the flood of Muslims or the question of radical feminists, et cetera, and there's no real merit behind whatever he's saying, or she, for that matter, you know, you don't have to be prepared at all. You can just sit back and let them do the talking, and then you still get all the clicks. So I feel like that's something that actually happened. It seems really stupid to talk about this, but that's really what social media has actually brought us as a present, along with a whole packet of great stuff. That's what it actually brought us as well. So there's that one thing. The second thing is actually to make sure that we call out, you know, these politicians on how they address, you know, these bad boys, so to speak, to not provide them with a broad, you know, platform for spreading their, you know, their hate, unfortunately. I know a lot of activists who have actually declined to speak with, for example, anti-abortion activists in Poland. Because that exactly what I said, that they're not going to enter into a pit bull fight, because that's not, you know, what should be done about these issues, these very important human rights issues. And I feel that we should call upon, and I mean, maybe this is the lawyer in me speaking, but call upon, you know, having merit-based discussions, make merit sexy again, really. Because it's become something that is boring, something that is not appealing to the media. And I feel like as experts, as activists, we have to bring it back, because right now this is leading to a whole new narrative that is being forced upon the population thanks to the media, the media's love of shock, of the shock value. And I feel that we should be demanding of our centered politicians for them to not only be centered and say that, yes, this is just another point of view, but to be merit-based, to be prepared to answer very tough questions, and to not be afraid of, you know, actually saying no. You know, what you're saying is racist, what you're saying is anti-human rights. Instead of going into a debate and actually saying that, yes, this is a valid point that you are making. Well, not in a democracy, I believe. And I feel that we should make this very clear. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the answers. I'll try also maybe to put in some of my thoughts when I was thinking about all the things that you kind of said, and maybe put it as a sort of conclusion of this panel. When you think about the centrists and their flirting with the far right, I think that there are numerous reasons for that, but one of them I think is also because for centrists, it also gives them this other character of like, you know, anti-systemic character, something that I think Eliza was speaking about, in a sense of, for some people, it's appealing, because I really think that the majority of our populations are really discontent by the state of things in which we live in, like the material conditions that we kind of live in. And people are very dissatisfied with that, especially in the region where I live, that is ex-Yugoslavia and Southeast Europe or Balkans. So I think that this is behind one of the reasons behind the centrist flirting with the far right. But I think that the interesting thing here also is this status quo and our defensive position. When I speak about us, I think about this broad, progressive political landscape from the center to the left. And I think we've been on a defensive for a very long time. And when we think about our own appeal, our own, how do we attract people? How do we attract young people? I think that we are badly lacking a vision or a boldness and the politics that go outside the you know, the today's common sense, this liberal common sense. And I think that in order to make it more damaging for centrists to cooperate and flirt with the rights, far right, we have to build our own position. We have to make our position more stronger, in a sense that we wield the baton. And if we are stronger, we can wield a better and a more bigger baton, you know, in a sense, and be a bigger threat to the ones that are doing this, I say, socially negative policies, by linking to the far right, reaffirming the far right, and things like that. So when thinking about how do we build our own positions, and I completely agree with what Liz said, and I think it's very important to build more inclusive, not only Antifa movements, but also like the progressive groups and politics as such, you know. But when thinking about it, yes, we have to be more inclusive, but I also think that we must show some kind of boldness and some kind of politics that go beyond. And I think that, and I'm going to risk it and going to refer to some historical phenomena. And there was this anti-fascist movement in Yugoslavia, which was from my point of view, when we think about comparatively, it was, from historical sense, the most successful anti-fascist movement in the world. At the end of the war, it had like more than 500,000 people under arms chasing the Nazis, the domestic traders out of the country. It was a pretty good movement with a huge popular support from the people. And how did it do it? I think it did it because it had the boldness and it had the politics. It had the constructive politics, which was emancipatory. It was built around providing people with healthcare, access to the healthcare, the access that they never had. It built upon the access to the education. It built on the access of this all modernist elements of our everyday lives. And this was their promise. And I think when we think about the successfulness and attractiveness of a movement, of the progressive politics, I think that we need to kind of think about what are these policies and how do we define emancipatory policies, and then how do we, you know, talk around them, how do we promote them, and what's most important, how do we practice them, and how do we practice them? And I think in order to demonstrate that they could work and that they work, and I think that this is something that when we think about appeal and the attractiveness of how do we attract people, I think that we should somehow be more bold and think about the policies that go beyond. And this is also it's quite challenging to do that in these times, as I think we painted out in this panel. So yeah, I also don't have any blueprints, but yeah, just wanted to refer and give a little bit of more deeper history as a historian here on the panel, and try to conclude with that. I think that thank you for the attention. Thanks to the Liz, Johanna, Eliza, and Maria. You were all great, very inspiring. Yes, I would conclude this panel and give a word to my colleague Amelia Martinez-Lobo from Madrid office to give the final remarks of the whole event. Thank you very much for the attention again.
Thanks, Josip. What to say? What more to say? I think everything is already said. So I just wanted to thank you, all of you, especially those who joined this webinar and for their interest, of course, to the panelists, the sponsors, the regional coordinators, also to Bjørn, Ihler, our main coordinator of this project, and RLS colleagues, especially from Berlin. That I mean, this is a huge project and a lot of invisible work behind. So thank you to all of you. And I think this is also a proof that we still need an anti-fascist commitment and also coordinated job. So to make it possible and real. And just a small recap of what is ENAM. ENAM is not only a research project, it's also a project of data collection, a way to monitor the international interconnections. It's an attempt, and it's a very huge commitment to build an Antifa network, to defend democracy. So, and also, I think also Liz highlight this. It's a safe space for anti-fascist movements and anti-fascist organizations and journalists. And it's a huge and complex platform. We hope that you find it useful. It's a tool and a platform that hopefully you find useful. We would like to keep this network and this project alive. So this is not this conference and this presentation, actually we consider as the beginning of this project, keeping the research and the networking alive. So we will keep updating information very often. More country reports will come. And of course, I think it's also interesting to keep updating on strategies and lessons learned that, for example, from Greece, Johanna gave us a huge picture, an overview of what can we learn from their experience in Greece against the Golden Dawn. So last but not least, no pasarán. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia, and thanks to all of you for participating at different levels. And before coming to an end with the music performance, I will hand over to Yorgos to show us his graphic recordings. And if you want, you can say some words, but try to keep it short as we are running a bit out of time.
Thank you very much for giving me this chance to show you some of my pictures. It's actually, this is the first part, with Franziska, Johanna, Bjørn, and Friedrich, talking about introducing us to the website, a website which is actually a very complex, has a very complex structure, and includes lots of data, lots of analysis in different countries about monitoring far-right MPs and parties in the European Parliament, with graphs. It should be getting fed more and more, because for the moment, it's just the tip of the iceberg which is seen. But there is so much to keep an eye on. And all those people who are all these nationalists, fascists, anti-Semites, patriots, they are actually the same people who are fighting against different communities, and they are pretty much interconnected. They're not lonely wolves. They have a connection, and they have a plan, and they are working for each other. We have to find out who, through monitoring, we have to find out who is financing them and try to understand how we can coordinate ourselves against them and point out the far-right danger. This page should be useful for prosecutors, for activists, and for actually the whole movement. I go to the second page, which is this one, where Liz made her marvelous introduction about there's no good and no bad countries. That was something I really liked as an idea. The danger is everywhere. And we shouldn't forget that it's capitalism. It's not just a question of some strange people who have some strange ideas. It's capitalism which uses them, and it's actually also provoked by them, by capitalism. Austerity policies, uneven development, the war on refugees, all these are things which are part of a European policy, and they are using far-right to achieve its policies, like far-right attacks on migrants. So yes, it's misogyny, white supremacy are interlinked. We should never forget it's not just one subject at a time, it's all together. Poland is a good example. Eliza talked about how the peace, populists are using their narratives and their lies to provoke, to promote the kind of patriotism and for controlling. They control the public sphere. It was a huge movement by the women who made this major moves against the government, and it was a way to combat fear and to combat all these misogynist policies. Then we had Ioanna Meitani from Greece. She talked about how the government, and actually not only the government, but also the media, used Golden Dawn as their puppets in a way, in order to promote their anti-immigrant hysteria and their Islamophobic discourse. And it was only after many years of impunity and racist crimes that the Greek state reacted. Should not forget that actually state and government is not the same. It was maybe a surprise for many Greeks that Greek justice put those people behind the bars. And it was definitely also because Pavlos Fissas was the first person who was killed, the first Greek person killed by Golden Dawn, which made the anti-fascist movement grow much more. So the anti-fascists had to fight against police, the Golden Dawn, the state and media. Actually, police and Golden Dawn, you never know where one starts and where the other ends. And monitoring the Golden Dawn was crucial. This was a main point of what she said. So let's come to the second part, which was how to form borrowed alliances. And $1 million question is Bob Johnson democracy? Is it just a sign of how hollowed out our democracies are? So, and what is very important to figure out is how can we address this question that we are not experts on fascism? We should ask the victims of colonialism. And there was a very nice example of the Colston Fall, how an action of 4 people, 4 young people, created a whole narrative about, or helped this narrative to become very present in British society. So anti-fascism is not just smashing Nazis. It's to show solidarity with refugees. It's to not being dogmatic. It's to open our minds to listen and to show solidarity, just like the Polish women did. which what they managed was to make a huge movement and they were maybe the only serious opposition to all those, to everything what the peace government has done. So actually, we need the movement to protect the citizens from their own state. So peace off, let's say once again, never forget. And let's go to the third, which is not full, but it's enough to say here too, how to involve young people. One answer is to create artists, concerts and actions which really involve young people there, and also address subjects which are much more into their everyday life, not only about history, how did our grandparents smash fascism, but also to address those things which are today so important, like Black Lives Matters, like the climate justice question. So we have to ask them. That's the main thing of how to involve young people, is to open our ears and to listen to what they have to say, include them in our teams, because they know much better what's going on, what affects people. And we also should address questions like the cooperation of media with the bad boys. We need more activity in social media, and also to make sure that we don't debate with racists, and that we need to build our own positions, not just reacting to what the others do, to what the fascists do. And yes, and one thing which is pretty nice too was this, that system uses anti-system to continue with their agenda. So as a last here, a little picture of Amelia with her no pasarán. We need, oh my God, we need to update our strategies, and we need to learn from each other. No pasarán. Yes. Let's go on with it. It's a great thing to do.
Thank you, Yorgos, so much. It was very nice pictures, very interesting. And as there were questions in the chat, we will upload it on the website and also on social media. And so now we are really at the end. I really want to thank you, everybody, as everybody said already. And now we are having a musical contribution by Christy Moore, who is one of our patrons of the project. And Christy Moore is one of Ireland's most cherished and successful artists. Since his early years and days, the Irish folk singer has incorporated social and political commentary in his work, such as the international anti-fascist tradition of Irish republicanism. He has recorded a version of Yellow Triangle from the 1996 album Graffiti Tongue to mark the today's launch of the European Network of Anti-Fascist Monitoring. This will be the end, and enjoy the song and see you later somewhere. And thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good compañeros everywhere. I sing the words of Pastor Niemöller. I sing these words from Dublin, Ireland. Black triangle, pink triangle, green triangle, red triangle, lilac triangle, the pink triangle, and they wore the yellow triangle. When first they came for the criminals, I did not speak. Then they began to take the Jews. When they fetched the people who were members of trade unions, I did not speak. They took away the Bible students. They rounded up the homosexuals. Then they gathered up the immigrants and the gypsies. I did not speak. I did not speak. Eventually they came for me, but there was no one left to speak. The black triangle, the pink triangle, the green triangle, the red triangle, the pink triangle, the lilac triangle, and the war, the yellow triangle, and the war, the pink triangle, and we wore the silent triangle. We did not speak.